Greetings, everybody, to this week's episode of Pluralia Dialogos. I'm very happy to be joining everybody listening today in this audience to discuss some world-breaking developments. And the guest that will be joining me today on this show, as everybody knows, is Drago Bosnic of InfoBricks fame and Lux Media, as well as the famous Alex Krainer, who has recently attended Pluralia's recent Verona summit on multipolarity that took place between October 29th and October 30th. He's going to tell us a little bit about that and give his assessment on world events. Unfortunately, there are some technical issues on both Drago and Alex's side, so I'm going to be filling in until they both arrive onto this show. It's unfortunate, but that's one of the consequences of just doing these live streams with technical issues being what they are. But I have been affirmed from both gentlemen that they will be able to make it sooner than later. What I guess I will do principally right now is just discuss a little bit some of the elements that I think are shaping the long-term trends facing human civilization as it stands right now, the context as such, which is often forgotten. And I think that there's a tendency to get a little myopic, I've noticed, amongst many analysts, there's a lot of noise. It's even, I think everybody listening, if you're geopolitically adept and passionate, such that you are receiving this invitation and you are watching the show, that this interests you, you've noticed that there's a little bit of noise. It gets a little bit overwhelming. And I think, again, the forest is lost for the trees. So just as a bit of a reminder, as we wait for our two main guests to emerge today, and I think this might actually have something to do with some daylight savings, come to think of it. I noticed that my clocks, just before I go into the actual show, I noticed that my clocks in the house featured an hour in the future, and my actual phone and computer, which are tuned to the internet, are an hour in the past. So I don't know if I wasn't paying attention to a daylight savings issue. If that's the case, that could be terrible, in which matter European and North American daylight savings being not calibrated for some reason. I think there's a 2-week disparity. There might be some form of miscommunication there pertaining to the time that we're supposed to start. That's a concern that I have. I didn't verify that. So if actually people who are listening live right now could tell me if there was a daylight savings that I missed last night, that would be highly appreciated. I'm just going to open up the comment section and have a listen here. Otherwise, we're just going to wait. So as I was mentioning, the issue of context is so very important, so often missed. And what we have today is a systemic breakdown. It's not really something which should be a surprise. It's not something that emerged last year or the year before that. It didn't even emerge a decade ago. Some people say, oh, today's systemic crisis is the result of an incompetent approach to the 2008 economic crisis that nearly tore up the world system. I would say no. This goes back even further. And I'm going to say something about why that is. Now, as many people watching might not be aware, the world economy used to be wired, never perfect. It was always a very imperfect system. There was always dishonest interests with an immense amount of power trying to manipulate every institution that they could in the favor of an encrusted elite, self-identified as the masters of the world, with the slave families that would be destined to be ruled by in an ignorant happiness, or maybe ignorant unhappiness, under a feudal overlord's sort of system of controls. That's been a long-standing agenda. The undermining of things like the sovereign nation state as a principled institution of shaping global policy in the benefit of the people, and also with the participation of those people who are not part of the higher so-called clubs, has been an issue for a long time. The way that this has been largely targeted, as far as the sovereign nation state is concerned, has been through economic warfare. This is why I'm very much looking forward to especially Alex Krainer's take, and also Drago today as two astute geoeconomic analysts. What had happened, and this really goes back to 1971, it's so important, that those institutions that were taken over in the United States itself through instruments like the Trilateral Commission, run by people that everyone knows, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who created the manifesto for the Trilateral Commission, between two ages, America and the technocratic age. That became the really core manifesto for the creation in 1973 of the Trilateral Commission, with his big, sometimes rival, but actual, I think, always collaborator, Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, and many others who quickly took over the control of domestic, of foreign, of economic, of military policymaking, going throughout the 1970s and onward. Now, one of those members, George Shultz, Eastern Time gained an hour. Okay. Carlos, thank you very much for letting me know that Eastern Time gained an hour, as I had suspected, meaning that was not properly communicated to Drago and Alex, who are far removed from us right now. I'm going to actually message with this new information. I'm going to message Drago as we speak, just to let him know. Daylight, I'm writing that right now, daylight savings, sorry, forgive me. Savings. Advance. Okay, I just messaged Drago to let him know that. So the severing of the US dollar from both the gold reserve system, but also more specifically the fixed exchange rate system, was a complete coup d'etat that a lot of people don't realize set into motion the time bomb, the transformation of our economy, of our once viable industrial economy, into effectively a time bomb. And how was that done? Well, before the 1971 period, when the dollar was floated, principles of measuring gross domestic product, GDP, pricing theories, interest rate theories, how governments would respond to interest rate metrics were generally shaped by physical productive economic concerns. The physical agro-industrial base was considered very important in judging monetary policy. That ensured that there was a degree of important reality grounding the behavior of economics. And after 1971, that was increasingly less and less the case. And more what we had with the era of deregulation, this logic that emerged out of the Nobel Prizes given to people like Friedrich von Hayek, Milton Friedman, that legitimized the idea that government should play no role whatsoever, the nation state should play no role in economic behavior, that blew up in the form of things like Thatcherism, Reaganomics, the deregulation and liberalization of the economic order of the 1980s, especially the mergers and acquisitions that crushed so many small and medium enterprises in every field and resulted in things like universal banking, the Big Bang operation of Margaret Thatcher being one thing in Canada, the destruction of the Four Pillars, the Canadian Glass-Steagall operation that ensured the behavior of banking from finance trusts and investment. Commercial banking would always be kept in separate compartments, not to be cross-contaminated. Those things were destroyed as universal one-stop shop banking became the new norm. That set the foundation for what became, under Greenspan, the destruction of Glass-Steagall, the D2 thing, and then ultimate destruction in 1998 of the United States bill that had been passed as a banking act in 1933 under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that ensured that investment bankers, speculators could not access people's savings and commercial finances, commercial assets, in terms of gambling. And they would thus never be bailed out, because if you gamble and you lose, you take your loss. And if you're bankrupt, then you collapse. As FDR demonstrated, had to be the case when hundreds of leading Wall Street bankers were put in prison for manipulating illegally the markets in the 1920s and beyond. Things like the preferred clients list of JP Morgan was a major one that ensured that the Great Depression would be suffered only by the people, but those in the know would gain immensely with a wealth transfer of hard assets during the context of a foreseeable economic collapse in 1929. The same thing. What put the rule of moral law, of natural law, on top of the behavior of these financiers, who were also, by the way, promoting fascism, financing fascism as the economic miracle solution, both in Europe and the United States and Canada. That was Glass-Steagall, and that was completely taken down by 1999. And during that time, again, under Alan Greenspan, who was very close with the Trilateral crowd, he was a member, after all, he also ensured that creative financial instruments, things like derivatives, would become normalized. Things that normally junk bonds which would get you thrown in jail in the early 80s, as Michael Milken had discovered, would become increasingly normalized and applied to economic behavior more broadly, such that by 1991, the world saw $3 trillion of derivatives, essentially fictitious financial instruments, games within games that use complex mathematical equations, essentially, and high frequency trading. A lot of quantum mathematicians from Russia were even unemployed after the Soviet Union collapsed and absorbed into the City of London and Wall Street to come up with more elaborate models that involve probabilistic theories that really only had application in quantum mechanics. And all of a sudden, they found a job for them in developing econometric models that justify the growth more and more of these derivatives. Insurance on increasing types of debts, weather derivatives, different types of things that would then be bundled, securitized, gambled upon on the futures and the spot market. And $3 trillion was a lot, but it was still a relatively small fraction of the overall economy, the world GDP of the time. Maybe 50, 60 trillion dollars was the world physical, real, more or less real GDP. But by 1999, when Glass-Steagall was taken down, these things measured about $74 trillion of derivatives. That's a very, very big growth in the context of only less than a decade. But then after 1999, especially after the Y2K bubble was popped, and especially after the new age of terrorism and the war on terror was inaugurated with 9/11, and lest we not forget the anthrax attacks as well, which justified another biosecurity apparatus grown internationally with something over, according to Chinese and Russian figures, estimates, over 300 U.S. international biolabs under no oversight of any worth internationally. That creates a major concern that grew out of the so-called anthrax attacks of September to December of 2001. So you had this new ideology, but people often forget that while they look at the military, the bioweapon aspect of the surveillance state growth that had occurred, they often forget to look at the economics at the same time as part of the same war on the nation state and civilization itself. This is something. Oh, Grace is saying, Drago's signing in right now, and this is what resulted in these derivatives going from 73, 74 trillion all the way up until 700 trillion when the bubble collapsed under the subprime in 2007, and it was never dealt with. There were loopholes created. People like Mark Carney ensured under his official role working for the Financial Stability Board, the Bank of International Settlements Oversight Committee that manages global derivatives, that things like the bail-in regime that was done on a small scale in Cyprus would be then embedded within international government banking laws. What was done in the United States under the Dodd-Frank Act. It was done in Canada in 2016. That gave the banks, these major systemic too big to fail banks, the authorization to steal, to confiscate bank deposits of savers from commercial banks should a collapse happen, and then turn these people who have their money in banks into co-owners of bankrupt financial institutions. Much more moral than bailing out banks with taxpayer money. Now you get to just steal their money directly by things like conversion bonds and other things. A lot of institutional investors, mutual funds, RSPs, other accounts, pension plans would obviously play a big role in ensuring that this massive amount of wealth would be there to be stolen in the context of the next wave of collapse. And that next wave of collapse was very foreseeable in 2008 and 2009, because nothing again was done to really deal with the systemic flaw of derivatives and the reality of physical economic needs, the physical reality of what people live in and what we eat and how food emerges, how it's created, how infrastructure even exists in the first place, let alone is maintained and improved upon. Concepts that we once took for granted in the 50s and 60s were completely lost in the abstractions of economic theorizing of the recent decades. So now we're in a position where reality is hitting like a shock front. It's very difficult, as Alex Krainer would be able to tell everybody, it's very difficult to put a number on what exactly is today's global derivatives in circulation. Some people say it's upwards of 750 trillion, not that different from 2008, but I've seen other very reliable economists who have pointed out it's upwards of 1.4 quadrillion to 2.4 quadrillion dollars. And it's, again, very difficult to measure these very abstract things. That being said, it is a time bomb. It is a time bomb that any small deleveraging or default within a variety of trigger points within the debt-based economy could result in a massive deleveraging and either hyperinflation or some mixture of hyperinflation and deflation at the same time, which is sort of what we've been going through for a number of years in some weird way because of just the weird circumstances of having a bit of both Weimar Germany 1923 dynamics of having printed quadrillions of dollars, untold amounts of money artificially to pump up a bloated banking system. But at the same time, we have, much like 1929, not like 23 in Germany, but 29 in the United States and broadly, is a collapse of the physical, economic, productive powers. We have that too. We have debts that are unpayable. And it's just a question really of when. We are going to get a new system, when that new system is going to emerge, and who will be, under what principles will it behave, under whose interests will it serve is really the big question. So that is where we are going to just zero in on some of the specific details over the fight of that new system going on in the world right now as we speak. And things like the APEC summit that had just occurred in Asia, in South Korea, featuring major world leaders negotiating major deals that are going to shape the coming months, years, decades of the future of human civilization have been happening, both there and abroad, but also on the Arctic front, the issue of South America, the issue of what is going to be the nature of the world order. Is it going to be one based upon nation states, the respect for sovereign nation states as enshrined by the United Nations Charter, as has been outlined by Russia, China, and the multipolar alliance leaders? Or is it going to be something a little bit more nasty, much more feudal, techno-feudal in pedigree, and something that we as human beings don't want to have anything to do with? Is that going to be what defines the behavior of the new system? Now, I'm very happy to see that Drago has heard my call for help, and he has accommodated very, very quickly despite the time difference. So Drago,
it's a pleasure to be here. Of course, it's an honor. I'm so sorry about the technical issues and also the damn DST. It's different in various countries, and some countries don't observe it at all. So I'm completely lost, on the time difference.
No, Drago, it's entirely my fault. I did not even realize that there was a daylight savings coming on. I had no idea. Like I was telling the audience just as we began, and I woke up this morning and I found that the physical clocks in my house were telling me one time, and then my cell phone, my computer were telling me another time. And I didn't have coffee today. I'm trying to get off coffee, which I think is a problem. My mind didn't put two and two together to realize that something had happened with this stupid daylight savings thing, and why it's not calibrated across the ocean, I don't know. This is again why I wish the flat earthers were right, because we would never have to deal with this. But thank you nonetheless for coming on, man. I was just going through a little bit of an overview of some of the geoeconomic historical dynamics that have shaped the current systemic breakdown of the transatlantic and the fight for the new system, the inevitability of the collapse and the inevitability of a new system coming on. But who is that system going to serve? That's sort of what I just sort of went through in a brief 15-minute exposition. But how are you looking at the world today? We got a few points that I wanted to ask you, and Alex, who's going to, I guess, come on after I message him. We got the issues of the threatened regime change in Venezuela. That's a major one I'd like to scratch on today with you, but also obviously the discussion that had happened between Xi Jinping and Trump. You had major world leaders, the South Korean leader and Xi Jinping, Japanese leadership, and Trump also. So what do you think is the most important thing for people today to be thinking about going into this conversation?
Well, the warmongers in Washington, D.C., they talk about full spectrum dominance, but all we have is full spectrum chaos, Mm-hmm. And now at this point, obviously, we're always going to condemn the warmongers and people who want to push for these forever wars. But, seeing contacts between leaders of countries like the United States, like China, and of course, Russia is always a good thing because, we have to go one step at a time. First, let's hope we're not going to have nuclear war. That's the most important thing. And then we can, move from there downwards and see what other, underlying issues are. And of course, one of those is Venezuela. And we see that people like Lindsey Graham are very, very excited about a potential war. And all these like warmongers, they're happy just to see a bunch of people killed. And there was also an embarrassment for the Pentagon because they didn't really know who the 60 people they've killed are. So essentially they're killing people claiming to that they're drug like traffickers, but they have no idea who these people are. So it kind of makes no sense that they're making decisions based on nothing, because they have no actionable intelligence to work with. They're just shooting missiles and stuff at people and dropping bombs. And it seems to me they want to expand this and of course attack a country like Venezuela. Venezuela is not, it's not going to be an easy target for. They've been in a decades-long crisis. They have economic issues and so on. But I mean, it's a sort of like a combination of Vietnam and Afghanistan. So it's going to be extremely difficult to wage a war against a country like that because it's a mountainous jungle. So I cannot imagine a place worse for warfare of any kind. Like even in modern day, when you have drones and stuff and ISR being intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, 24/7, all these technologies that you can use against various targets. It's not easy to do it because obviously also Venezuela is heavily armed. I mean, this is not something that's very well known, outside of Venezuela itself. They have the Su-30SMs, which are pretty modern fighter jets, and they have the KH-31 and KH-32 potentially in the future. But the KH-31 is an anti-ship missile. And obviously because there's not really an ocean, but like the Caribbean Sea between the United States and Venezuela, they will have to do like this amphibious invasion of some kind if they want to attack Venezuela. So that means anti-ship missiles against ships. So that's not going to be, as easy as people think. I just hope it doesn't come down to that. And I hope that this is some kind of a Trump's, attempt to control the market a bit, to manipulate how the stocks will go up and down and stuff like that. Because, I mean, this is something he's been doing before he became president, right? He's a businessman. Trump is a businessman. So he's not really like a person who likes to go and wage war. I understand there are people who want to influence him, who want to push him to do this because war is also very good business. But I just hope he realizes that war is a very good business just for a very, very select, very small group of people who want to get richer and more powerful, but it's actually bad for everyone else. And especially if you count a country like Venezuela, it's not just about oil reserves. It's about the fact that there are tens of millions of people in the country who could become refugees and then move, towards the United States, which is something that Trump doesn't want, right? And if he doesn't want that, he wouldn't want to destroy a country because we've had these issues in the Middle East, where the Middle East was destroyed over like 2 or 3 decades of constant warfare that was imposed from the outside and resulted in tens of millions of people who had to move elsewhere. And then you have all these ultra right-wing people in Europe hating the refugees without realizing that, some of the imperialist policies that they helped facilitate actually caused this issue. So I really hope Trump really is more like forward-looking and more like understanding of what the consequences might be, even for his internal policies, because having tens of millions of more people trying to move into the United States is not going to be easy to stop that, especially those people have no other choice, because a country that is going to be in a war or is going to be plunged into some kind of a civil unrest or something, or maybe even civil war, is going to have a bunch of issues. Now, this is on the local level, more like on the issue of the so-called Monroe Doctrine. On a global level, of course, we see that the Ukrainian front is pretty much collapsing. There are now 2 groups of two Ukrainian battle groups which are surrounded, and about 10,000 soldiers are now in a cauldron, as the Russians call it. So it's essentially like they're almost surrounded. The Russians usually leave them just one small, area where they can, just get out of there or something like that, or create a kill zone where they would just be, murdering anyone who tries to move in or tries to get out. So essentially, we see that the front lines are collapsing everywhere, and the geopolitical situation is becoming pretty chaotic. I mean, it's been chaotic for years at this point, but now it's getting worse. So having Trump and having Xi Jinping talk at least talk about ameliorate these economic issues, of course, is a good thing, because economic issues usually devolve into something worse, which means geopolitical competition, more military activity, especially in the Asia Pacific, which is now becoming a heavily contested area. So we have a bunch of issues that we can, of course, talk about, and we see that there's some dialogue between various sides, and of course I commend that. Of course, it's going to be much easier to control some kind of a global crisis than if all this is without communication and it could devolve into something much worse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you would have thought that we would have learned the lesson of the self-destructive nature of asymmetrical warfare, this forever war logic that doesn't benefit anybody. The military-industrial complex, maybe, but overall, the destruction we've done to ourselves, and as you pointed out, even when people flip out about immigrants taking our jobs, the deplorable, darker skinned people or whatever coming in to try to steal our lifestyle and undermine us through some sort of subtle recolonization or whatever the theories are that are floating around that are radicalizing a lot of people who are just, desperate because they've been beaten up by the economy. What frustrates me so much is that what's often just completely neglected is that the reason why they've left their home countries is because we destroyed them through economic and regime change warfare for so many decades. They would be happy to stay in their home if we hadn't acquiesced to a policy of global colonialism and the destruction of these people. So a lot to be discussed. Economic battles and the economic domain is so very important to resolve so many of these things or exasperate so many of these other aspects of what makes life worse for most people and for everybody. And I'm very happy here that at this point, I've noticed that Alex has gotten my SOS and has promptly clicked on the StreamYard link. So Alex, Krainer, my man, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Matthew. Hi, Drago. Good to see you both again. It looks like I'm late, aren't I? There was a time change, isn't it?
Time is relative. There was a time change. I had no idea, so I'm glad.
No, I had no idea either. So I was expecting that I was we were connecting in about 1 minute's time. But
1 minute's time. For me, it's 11:30 a.m. in New York time. For you, you're 30 minutes. Oh,
isn't that correct?
That's so weird. Okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay, I'm glad we're all here right now, and I've been on this earth now 43 years, and I cannot get my mind around daylight savings. My mind cannot grasp it.
It's okay, Matthew. Google doesn't either. I had a number of appointments. If they're in different time zones, at the daylight saving times, it messes it up. It sets it an hour off before or after.
All right, when we take over, we're going to fit this out. When we take over, this is going to be the first thing we resolve, guys. Before the economic disaster, it's this. We're going to get some.
Well, they just have to do away with the daylight savings time, and that would be it. I wanted to say something about the migrations because I've heard that you were discussing this with Drago, and I learned something from an acquaintance of mine who works in recruitment. Okay, so he worked in recruitment for a ship company. Okay, they were recruiting for these big cruisers, right? The big cruise ships. And then he set up his own company in Croatia, right? And so what I learned from this person is that it's actually a profitable business. It's not just that we have destroyed Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on, so all these people are migrating westward. This is actually being incentivized. So the math that I found out from them is that basically the government in Croatia is subsidizing these immigrant workers with 600 euros per month. Okay. So what he does is he goes to India, to Nepal, to the Philippines. Now, lately it's the Philippines, and I don't know who decides this or why, but they were told, go get the Filipinos. So he goes to the Philippines, he recruits people. And so then they come and they are paid, I think they work for something like for 800 euros a month. That's the salary that they accept to work for. Whereas the minimum salary in Croatia, I think, is something like 1,000 or 1,300 euros per month.
Mm-hmm.
So employers who get these Filipinos, and Croatia has, I think, something like close to 500,000 of Filipinos, Nepalese, and Indians. They get 600 euros. First they get the employee for 800 euros a month. And then the government subsidizes it with 600 euros per month. So in effect, the employers pay 200 euros a month because it's 800 minus 600 is paid for by the state. And these subsidies are not available to natural-born Croatian citizens. Right? It is only available to the immigrants.
Yep.
So it's not just that people are leaving their countries because they're destroyed. This is actually some kind of a deliberate, incentivized business that somebody decided. Of course, no Croatian citizen would agree to this if they knew that this was being done. And apparently people don't know, because when I tell them this, they go like, "No, well, where did you get that from? That seems impossible. That's insane." Yes, it is insane, but I happen to know a person who is doing a business out of it. So if they're making money from it, that means that somebody's paying, and apparently it's the state paying. And if this is happening in Croatia, then I think it's pretty certain that it's being done in all other EU countries.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's much, much worse than just migrations from countries where, we instigated wars. So, people lost their jobs and economies and futures and so forth.
Right. Well, I think it's both the obvious ones are the war victims, but then also I think you've got the legacy, right? Also of this financialized empire system of exploitation that's been going on for centuries. But really, in the last century, we destroyed the Philippines over 120 years ago. We went in there militarily during a so-called war with the Spanish Empire. There was a whole false flag around the Main. Under Teddy Roosevelt's sort of guidance and the broader deep state of the United States. But then, the every time that there was a leader that had an idea of trying to do something for the industrial sovereign development of the people, they would often be also over many decades destabilized, undermined by financial warfare that kept them from developing and blossoming into a proper advanced industrial civilization, so that, even this type of arrangement of having people who are living and would be attracted to playing a role in this new weird economic arrangement, that shouldn't even, in my mind, that shouldn't even happen were it not for this artificial intervention on an economic front, even a dishonest economic front. But it's true, your point is well taken, and it creates resentment too. So people living in the United States or living in Croatia, real citizens, natural born citizens of those countries, feel natural resentment to when they do discover how unjust the favoritism is to those who are being brought in, that are undercutting their ability to live. And most people don't think about these supranational agencies above the mainstream politics that are actually shaping things. So it creates a danger also of, I think, more civil war, more violence when things get really desperate, which is always a danger.
Yes, and this is exactly the point, because I haven't thought about this, but a Croatian MEP that I listened to recently, he explained why these migrants are brought in. Obviously, they're low-cost labor force for companies, right? But what he said is that these people are extremely vulnerable because they come to a place where they don't know the language, where they like if they need to go see a doctor, they don't know how to, they don't know where to go, so they have no social support network, and they are therefore extremely vulnerable and easy to manipulate. So if the powers that be, the intelligence agencies, if they want to orchestrate some kind of a provocation, a fight, some destabilization, sabotage event, well, then this is a ready pool of recruits that they can reach into and manipulate, because these people have nothing but these state-sponsored services that kind of take care of them.
Yeah.
And so I think this is why they're there in such large numbers.
Well, Drago, what do you think about this stuff?
I just wanted to add, we had a similar situation in Serbia in the early 2000s, but it was more about the economy. It was like the orchestrated destruction of whatever Yugoslavia managed to build. So there was one company, and I had the chance to talk to people who run this company in the early 2000s and the 1990s. It was called Sever, which means north, essentially, in Subotica, in the northern Serbia. And this company was actually, while NATO was dropping bombs, this company actually made an arrangement with the Hungarians to export their products around the world. And they had like an increase in exports while NATO was bombing in 1999. And then in 2000, we had this regime change operation, which pretty much brought in the IMF and all these other guys. And what they did is they forced the company into bankruptcy, despite the fact that the company was completely profitable and it was working and so on. And thousands of people lost their jobs. And they did this all over the country, where hundreds of thousands of people were pretty much laid off. And then they moved in a lot of these other companies, which were pretty much importers. And what they did is they destroyed the domestic economy and ensured that we become dominated by these importers. And then, of course, you become dependent on everything from the outside, and you're not producing anything anymore. And by let's say 2010, 2015, Serbia was pretty much controlled by all of these foreign companies. So, I mean, this orchestration and the destruction of the economic livelihood of all these countries has been orchestrated probably for centuries, but in recent times for decades. And I had the chance to talk to the former, because I actually work with him, the former Yugoslav foreign minister, Zvivatin Jovanovic, who's in almost 90 at this time. Back in 2000, one of the people from the IMF actually told him, "Oh, Serbia has a very high private housing ownership. We need to bring that down, to jumpstart the real estate market, because at that time it was like around 90%, and they want to bring it down to 60." So, like, can you imagine just how insane all this is? It literally is. It's an orchestrated destruction of a society to make sure it can be exploited by whoever wants it.
Well, today I noticed that here. Let me just take this and just add a little bit of to it pertaining to the meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump. The Chinese Foreign Ministry put out a statement that I thought was very, very enlightened, making the point that the idea of making America great again and having good relationships between the USA and China are not mutually exclusive, that these can work together. I thought that was a very hopeful way of thinking, a very enlightened philosophy. Obviously, the U.S. living standards, a lot of the decay and the suffering of the people have a lot to do with the fact that, as I was pointing out before you gentlemen went on my little solo riff, was that there's been a conscious deindustrialization by design over the course of many decades, especially since the 70s, by, again, design of those managing things like the Trilateral Commission. So now you've got a system of dependency where only the middlemen, who are not affiliated with any particular nation state, have really benefited in power and influence, whereas nation states have become, reduced to a services economy or producer economies that don't have very high living standards. However, China and many of the nations of the multipolar alliance have chosen to break out of that mold in recent years. Some people say that decoupling, if it's done wisely, might benefit both USA and China, while, again, keeping positive economic relations in place. So do you guys think that the saber rattling, there's some who are looking at Trump's messaging and that of MAGA 2.0 against China as being really, really dangerous? I think it's dangerous messaging, but I've seen also certain analysts who have pointed out that perhaps there's something very sane and good that is being arranged to help both countries break free of the system of self-destruction that they've been locked into. Do you guys think that the negotiations and the deals that were reached in this week's APEC summit between Xi and the United States are beneficial, or do you think that it's just sort of lipstick on a pig? Alex, throw it at you.
I'd let Drago go first because I just came back from a trip and I wasn't paying too much attention to the news flow lately.
Okay, all right.
Well, I can say it reminds me of when Trump tried to do the same during his first administration. So there were similar agreements like soybeans for tech and so on and so on. Obviously, this is good. However, we have to understand that both countries are run by enormous systems, and of course, there are various interest groups that want to push their own agendas. And of course, in the United States, as Eisenhower said a long time ago, the military-industrial complex is extremely powerful. It has its own interests that are directly tied to the maintenance of this idea that there should be a confrontation between China and the United States. So, I mean, just one small example, like the Tomahawk cruise missiles can go up to $5 million for the Block 5 version. So obviously, if there's no competition or if there's no tension between the United States and China, there's no need for these missiles to be bought or made. While if there is, of course, they can be made and sold by the Raytheon or a Lockheed Martin or whoever. Like, all these weapon systems are extremely expensive. And of course, the military-industrial complex in the United States is incentivized to make things even more expensive because, of course, it's a private venture. Unlike, let's say, in Russia and China, where most of these companies are mostly state-owned. And the most important thing is to make sure that they have effective weapons that can defend the country. It's not about profits, because the government cannot make profit out of its own companies. While in the United States, the private sector is something that pushes the confrontation all the time. So for me, I mean, I always commend this. I hope that these agreements will actually reduce tensions and make sure that the countries cooperate in the long term. But it seems to me that the military-industrial complex is going to push, its own agenda. And at some point, Trump will have to budge because, like, these people are just too powerful. A lot of what people forget about is a lot of these congressmen and senators in the United States are directly tied. Their electorate is directly tied to the production of weapon systems, because a lot of the production economy in the United States has been outsourced except the military-industrial complex. It has not been outsourced as much as the rest of the economy. So if Trump really wants to reindustrialize the United States, he cannot touch the military-industrial complex, because that's going to do the opposite. It's going to further deindustrialize the country. So it's a really difficult situation for Trump himself, because he knows he cannot mess with these people. He doesn't want to lose their support. On the other hand, he doesn't want nuclear war. Obviously, I think it's very important to understand that people who have families, grandchildren, and stuff like that, obviously they don't want nuclear war, because their families are going to be affected just like anyone else. So that's a good thing. But of course, he has to contend with these people. He has to take their interest into account, and ensure that he doesn't hurt the interest of the United States as he sees it. Especially in terms of defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, you have the important issue also of China's relationship with Japan, with South Korea, which, there's been negotiations of having some sort of a common currency union of some sort, or some form of not a common currency, but some sort of a mechanism brought in place to settle a balance of payments and other things amongst those three countries. And people are wondering, is Japan going to ally with China in this case? I mean, the new president has spoken very, very favorably to having positive relations with China and not being an instrument for Western imperialism. At the same time, the new president has done some major deals with the United States that include also military deals as well, buying F-35s. Maybe these are also not mutually exclusive, but are harmonious, that it's possible for Japan to have a good relationship still with both the USA and with China at the same time, perhaps. I hope so, because like you said, the consequences otherwise would be what, a new Ukraine war in the Pacific or whatever. I mean,
I mean, let me just add one point. Now that you mentioned the F-35s, I keep saying that, technically speaking, these fighters are not really battle ready, especially not, for a gruesome war like the one in Ukraine. The interesting thing about the F-35s, Japan bought them in 2017 and got missiles for them only now, like 8 years later. So what does that mean? It means that the F-35, which I've been saying for years, is not really a military project. It's a geopolitical intelligence economic project, because it's extremely expensive, like exorbitantly expensive. but it's also not very good in terms of military applications, because it's not as robust as other jets, which is why the U.S. Air Force is buying F-15s, like 50-year-old jets, which are still being made and bought. And the interesting thing is these are like the workhorses of the military, and they're making them to last until 2080. Like, that's crazy, like to use half a century old jet and making it last until 2080, like almost the end of the century, which means like these are the jets that are going to be used for actual defense, and the F-35s are just going to be an economic project because like they're enormously expensive but not very good.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, now, Alex, before you came on, we had only briefly touched upon the topic of Venezuela, which is on everybody's mind right now. Obviously, major not battle fleets, but aircraft carriers. There's military maneuvers being made in Trinidad and Tobago, and Southcom is really consolidating itself. There's obviously pre-war messaging that is impossible to ignore. Apparently, Venezuela is working with Hezbollah, according to Lindsey Graham. They're the cause of all of our drug problems. It's all Venezuela. So it's the sort of messaging that makes one uncomfortable. And Maria Machado, whatever, got a Nobel Prize to legitimize her as well. She did an interview with what's his name, Donald Trump Jr. or something. So you've got some very dangerous red alarms. What's your take at this point? Do you think that it is as dire as some are saying, or do you think, like I have a co-host on another show that I host who has a more white-pilled hypothesis that there's actually some collusion between Maduro, Petro in Colombia, Trump and his team around actually dealing with these narco-terrorists that that involves a lot of smokescreen, kayfabe, and other things. So what's your take on the Venezuela situation?
I think it's hard to say, because at the facade, at the surface appearance of things, it looks like Trump administration is dead serious about going into Venezuela and regime changing it and bringing Maria Corina Machado to Caracas to head the government. This never came up as a priority for Trump administration until it came up. So he was talking about Canada and Greenland and this and that. Venezuela wasn't on the radar, and then suddenly it was again. I know that Venezuela has been in the crosshairs of Wall Street for a very long time, pretty much since Hugo Chavez took over. And the obvious reason is the oil and other resources. And we had an attempt to overthrow Hugo Chavez in 2002 or 2003. Then we had that regime change endeavor in 2019 when Juan Guaido declared himself president, and everybody says like, yeah, he's the president. We acknowledge them, and then the Brits, immediately decided, okay, so we're going to take over their gold reserves. That's now ours because Maduro is no longer legitimate president. So thank you very much. We're going to have their gold. And then there was also in 2020, there was an attempted invasion, something really ridiculous, the Bay of Piglets. But so far, Maduro is still in power. And so, a few things about this out of the blue, out of nowhere build up to regime change Venezuela. I don't think it's really coming from Trump. I think the pressure is being applied to Trump to do this. Why am I saying that this is coming from Wall Street? Because they've been talking about this since the early 2000s, and I remember the interview with Aaron Russo, which was, I don't exactly know when. I think it was filmed in 2002, maybe 2003. But basically, Aaron Russo became friends with one of the Rockefellers, Neil Rockefeller. And he was saying how he became friends with Neil Rockefeller, and they would visit each other at home and have dinners together and so forth. And Neil Rockefeller, and this was before 9/11, right? 9/11 terror attacks. And Aaron Russo, who is no longer with us, he said how Neil Rockefeller told him that there would be this big event, and then on the back of that event, they would start a global war on terror, and that this was pretty cool because, there's no real enemy. You can't really. So it would enable them to just go and intervene everywhere, and that on the back of that, they would go to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he also said to Venezuela. Now, there's I think what's really important to appreciate is that there's only one group in our societies that has a real interest for a political takeover of Venezuela, because it is true that Venezuela has allegedly world's largest oil reserves. And now this is, you could dispute this, because how they arrive at these oil reserve numbers is a bit of a farce, so you can't really believe these numbers, but it doesn't really matter so long as everybody believes that there's 304 billion barrels in proven oil reserves. You could trade with Venezuela and get that oil. And the United States, being the largest power in the neighborhood, I'm sure that they could easily go to Venezuela and negotiate a really good, advantageous deal to buy Venezuela's oil and whatever other resources. It could be mutually beneficial. You don't need to go to war over that. And when I say that they could negotiate a really good deal, they could negotiate a very long-term supply contracts at really good prices, so that this oil could be processed, brought to the United States market, and that somebody like ExxonMobil, Shell, whoever, could make great profits on this commerce. But the group that doesn't get any benefit from this, if it's just a trade deal, is the Wall Street banking establishment.
Yeah.
Because if it's the Venezuelan state company PDVSA who is exploiting this oil, if it's financed from Venezuela's internal funding, it doesn't add anything to the banking establishment in the West. But if they can take political control, then they could turn those resources into their own collateral. And once you have control of the collateral, you can start issuing loans on the basis of that collateral to your own clients. Meaning that now you could say like, oh, okay, so ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, whatever company, we're going to fund the development, and you go there, you develop it, you process it, you bring it to our markets, but we're going to fund this. So we're going to issue loans for you to do this. And what happens at that moment is that those loans, which are created out of thin air, suddenly become assets on the balance sheets of those banks, right? And so this is the closest Western finance has gotten to alchemy, of turning something into gold by basically a flick of a pen. But what you need to be able to do this is you need to take political control of a country, so that you get those contracts, so that your banks fund these developments. And then those loans, again, a loan is an asset on the balance sheet of a bank, and it becomes a profitable asset because you created the loan out of nothing. You didn't lend anybody your own money. You just created the balance in your client's account, and now your client has to pay back those loans with interest. You created the loan out of nothing, and now you start to get a continuous flow of payments because they're exploiting the resource in a different country. So that's where the pressure to take political control of Venezuela is coming from. The reason why I doubt that it's coming from Trump and his administration is exactly this sudden nomination of Maria Corina Machado for a Nobel Prize, because that didn't come from Trump. This happened at the same time as Trump was hoping to get the Nobel Peace Prize himself. So it obviously came from somewhere else, and it must be coming from the banking oligarchy, right? And so now the last point is whether this is actually going to happen or if this is smoke and mirrors, because Trump was in office in 2019 when the last regime change endeavor was taking place. And Trump, again, he appeared to be completely on board. And he was talking about Venezuelan oil and, the whole everything. But then he tasked John Bolton and Elliot Abrams with the regime. They became the regime change coordinators in his administration. And Trump himself said that he thought John Bolton was the dumbest person he ever met. And Elliot Abrams, I wasn't even aware that he was still alive. Like, he became Elliot Abrams rose to notoriety with the Iran-Contras deal in the 1980s. Right. And I think that he ended up in prison, or he was pardoned by George Bush Sr.
But yeah, I think him and John Poindexter were both pardoned.
Yeah, and Oliver North.
Yeah,
and then they disappeared. I didn't see them involved in anything in government. I was surprised that he even existed anymore. And suddenly Trump tasks him and the dumbest other guy, John Bolton. So he gave the project to two big flunkies in his administration, which told me that maybe he wasn't particularly serious about this, that he was kind of, the pressure was coming from Wall Street, like, get us Venezuela, like, we want to have Venezuela, that we need that. And I'll read a recent statement from the former ambassador to Venezuela, James Story, right? Because it kind of gives away the reason. And so here's what James Story just said the other day. This was an interview, I forget with whom exactly. Quote, this is a very, he's talking about Maduro, right? This is a very bad actor sitting on top of the world's largest known reserves of oil, plus the critical minerals that will fuel the 21st century economy. And he's in bed with our strategic competitors. So he's talking about this bad actor who is in bed with our strategic competitors on top of resources that will fuel the 21st century economy. What he's saying is that these resources would provide the collateral for a massive new credit impulse, because then the Wall Street banks, on basis of that collateral, could issue a massive amount of new money into the economy, primarily to their resources, to their clients, but also to new clients like the new Venezuelan government, because they could issue billions of dollars of loans to the new Venezuelan government, guaranteed by Venezuela's oil and other resources, right? And then there's a precedent for that. I'll wrap up. I know.
No, it's fine.
At a certain point, I think about 20 years ago, or even a bit longer, and I wrote a detailed article about this based on the research of a Canadian researcher whose name is Boychuk. He basically, at some point 20, 30 years ago, the Rockefeller interests in New York got the control of Alberta oil reserves. And so we're talking about 100 and supposedly, again, I don't know if anybody should believe this number, 175 billion barrels of supposedly proven oil reserves. And on the basis of that collateral, they created something like $8 or $9 trillion of new assets, right? Of new loans that went into the economy. And those assets inflated the early 2000s housing bubble, right? And so they inflated this housing bubble until it collapsed. And once it collapsed, they turned around to the government and said, you have to bail us out because otherwise the whole economy collapses. And then the government did bail them out. How much? $16 trillion. That's the Government Accountability Office's tally, $16 trillion. But independent estimates go up to $29 trillion. Let's pretend.
And what year frame? What year frame did this Rockefeller maneuver happen with Alberta?
So this is 1990s, and I think that the maneuvering already starts in the 1980s, and then at some point in the 1990s they get control of these oil resources, and then they start the development, and then by the 2000s they are already blowing up a big real estate bubble. I don't remember the title of the article where I detailed it.
I can make that available. Yeah.
No,
I do know the article.
Somewhere on my Substack. Yeah. And so anyway, let's pretend that the bailout was $16 trillion, which it wasn't. It was bigger. How much money is that? That is, I think, about $20,000 per every man, woman, and child living in the United States. So that incentives, that math it's far beyond the interest that Raytheon has, or GE, or any of these oil companies, defense companies. This is so colossal that if you can play that game, you end up walking away with absolutely massive profits. This is the incentive. Now, I told you that the estimated reserves, oil reserves of Alberta are 175 billion barrels. Venezuela is 304 billion barrels. So it's very substantially bigger than Alberta. So this is why this is being played. This is where it's coming from. And I think that the conduct of Trump and his administration is telling us that they cannot resist this. So he has to give them some kind of action. Whether he's going to give them decisive and successful action is one thing, or is he going to make sure he gets the D- on the assignment and nothing really happens? We'll find out. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that he's doing their bidding sincerely, or if he's just unable to resist it, so he has to take the test and try to get an F on it.
Yeah. On the issue of the evidence of a strategic change in overall U.S. foreign policy, because there's some things that have maintained a continuity, other things there's evidence of a change towards the positive, despite the efforts by those who would like to cling on to the old ideas of an end of history unipolar hegemonism. I don't know if that's even a word, hegemonism, but you've got these two different competing ideologies about what the U.S. should be in the context of the newly emerging multipolar system. You had mentioned, Alex, and I'd like to get Drago, because Drago, you're also based in Serbia. Alex, you're in Monaco. both of you guys have a lot of experience across Europe and Eastern Europe, political spectrums. And so, the point was made that some of your contacts have made the observation that since Trump came back in, there's been a positive, a reduced negative pressure being put on regime change policies for many that have targeted many of those Eastern European countries, the Balkan countries, that some would like to see open up as a second front against Russia. Drago, do you observe that as well in your mind's eye thus far, that there has been a positive reducing of that pressure to create a second front, or do you still see that coming on?
I still see it coming on, but I think that's like the echo of the previous administration, because the previous administration didn't just go away. Many of their policies, many of the people in power remained. The USA wasn't really, eliminated entirely. Like it's a massive system that has remained in place, at least as a shadow of its former self, but it's still there.
And NED as well, right? It still exists. It just has a new protocol where they don't have to make public where they put their money anymore. So we have no idea what they're actually doing. It didn't go
exactly. Away. This is exactly what I said when the USAID was being officially eliminated. This is a massive intelligence resource that no country, worth its salt is going to, just give up like that. That's not going to happen. And the USAID, as you said, just went back into the NED or whatever the organization is called now. There are various these three-letter agencies and organizations that are just continuing to work, as they did in the 1980s and 1990s, and then exposing themselves in the 2000s. We see that in Serbia. We saw it in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We see it pretty much everywhere. But of course, there's a downward spiral when it comes to this, because Trump has other priorities, and in a way he wants to make sure that he doesn't have to fight these forever wars, because he wants to focus on other stuff in the United States. As Alex said, it's very difficult to resist what these people want, and that of course is as Professor Shuzovsky says, manufactured dissent, which of course is going to cause or give the U.S. the casus belli to intervene or do whatever they want. And we see that. We see that in Serbia as well. In Serbia, of course, we have various issues on an internal level, which is, of course, is being abused to create more pressure on the government. People keep saying, oh, the government is resisting everything. Well, it's not resisting everything, because Serbia is, if you look at the geography of Serbia and its strategic position, it's very, very negative, because it's surrounded by NATO, it's surrounded by the EU. So the government doesn't have a choice. It's physically impossible for the government to say no to 85% or 90% of what the EU and NATO are demanding. Mm-hmm. But of course, there's always the 10% that you don't want to give. So they put more pressure on the government through these protests, through these other things, because for these people, it's not about whether you want to agree or disagree. It's diktat. Like they want you to just do whatever the hell they tell you to do. And even if you say 9 times out of 10 you say yes, it's still not good enough. They want blind obedience.
Yes.
And of course, this is the issue with the government. If the government pushes back just 10%, they're going to cause protests and stuff like that. And a lot of people, who are in Serbia, they like to accuse me like, oh, you're just you're the fan of the government or whatever. Well, I'm not. It's just that those people don't understand that while they are protesting for very valid reasons, whatever the hell they think they're going to accomplish is not going to happen. Like, you will protest, they will promise that some things will change or for the better, and then let's say they replace the government, and you realize none of the things they promised are going to be delivered. You're just going to have less sovereignty than you had yesterday. So people think, well, who gives a damn if it's 90%, you're 90% colony or 100% colony. Well, those 10% actually can mean a lot, because blind obedience, we see how blind obedience works for various European countries, and Hungary is a good example. I'm not saying Orban is perfect, but his pushback against, the system is something that gives Hungary some sort of a chance that it's not going to be, exploited fully. While we see other EU members, NATO member states, which are fully compliant, and it's creating a flurry of issues for them. I mean, Alex mentioned Croatia, 500,000 people in a country of 4 million. I mean, that's more than 10% of the population that's going to be not going to, belong to your culture. And of course, let's not even talk about the potential security issues that could create. And there's a bunch of countries like that in Europe. Because I have nothing against immigrants, but the point is, if you have millions of people from different cultures moving into your country, it's impossible to maintain stability because these people come from a very different culture. And I have nothing against low-level migrations because the person has the time to accommodate and to, just to get used to the culture that they've moved into. But if you have millions of people who are economic or whatever migrants, they have no time to integrate, nor would they, because they have their own small communities. And when those communities form, then you might have security issues in the next, 20, 30, or 50 years.
Absolutely. And Alex, I think you were speaking directly about the Republic of Spirska, a friend of yours or a contact of yours who had mentioned that things had also improved from the standpoint of U.S. pressures. Now, you have things like the Giuliani, who as a stooge has just recognized Kosovo, and that's weird. But then at the same time, there's that. What do you think of what Drago just said, and any other observations you have on that particular point before we move to the next question?
I agree with what Drago said. We're not out of the woods. These people will not give up. They will continue to try to create. Well, their whole geopolitical concept is based on rigging every possible region to become a flashpoint of instability, because this is how they rule the world, by keeping everybody weak, dependent, in need for credit and armaments from the West, and, to keep them perpetually their client. But what I have heard on a few occasions, just almost as a side thing from several Bosnian Croatian politicians and several Bosnian Serbian politicians, gave me the impression that something changed with the Trump administration and that the change is positive. And so I was at this event over the weekend in Istanbul, and I met with Denis Šulić, who is the tourism minister of the government of Republika Srpska. And I asked him, is this true? Well, he's a tourism minister, so I thought maybe he's not going to know. But on the other hand, he's going to be in cabinet meetings, so he's going to be privy to discussions of other sectors as well. And so what he told me was, he was like, oh yes, things are much, much better. He said, the difference is the difference is like day and night. The tensions are dissipating. The Americans have almost immediately, well, no, sorry, I can't say almost immediately, but they were very quick to undo a number of sanctions that have been imposed on companies from Republika Srpska, on politicians and leaders from there, which were targeted, which were kind of calculated to antagonize and to raise tensions. And so they've reversed all that. And now, apparently, there's a lithium resource there somewhere. I don't know exactly where it is. And they were in negotiations with the British for those lithium reserves. And he told me they were extremely aggressive about that. And, they don't have much there in terms of, industries and all this. And so they said, we have certain priorities, we want to preserve the, the ecology of our country. And second, we want the people who are in the rural areas to remain in the rural areas as producers, so our agricultural sector doesn't suffer and our waterways don't get destroyed. So if there's going to be some kind of an exploitation of this lithium here, it has to be up to very high environmental standards. And the British were apparently pretty much refusing this. They, you don't set any conditions. We're going to tell you how it's going to be. And he told me that the negotiations with the Americans are much, much different, that the Americans are respectful of their priorities and demands, and that the situation in Bosnia is definitely improving. And he literally told me, no, the difference is like night and day. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, Trump is not going to be forever there, and these predators are not going to go away. So it's not a battle won, but let's say that the pressure valve has released a lot of that pressure, and I hope that the situation will continue moving in the right direction, because otherwise we're in a lot of trouble in the Balkans. So, and I do want to point out, this is not a random thing. This is, Drago said Trump has other priorities. Yes, but here the improvement didn't happen because you shifted your attention to something else. You had to actually make positive change. You had to actually be deliberate about this. You had to elbow the Brits out of the way and say, enough now, we're in charge now, you're out. That had to happen. And so apparently it did happen. This is not a war won, but it's definitely a very positive improvement. And I believe that in order for this improvement to have happened, somebody had to know. And from those Croatian politicians that I mentioned to you, I know that they do know at the Trump administration, because what the guy was saying in this interview that I listened to is that he went very soon after Trump won the elections and got inaugurated. He flew over to Washington, D.C. for a meeting with people in the State Department. And he thought, now I'm going to have to explain to people where the hell Bosnia is on the map and who we are and what's going on. And he said that he was shocked that he came there and they knew everything. So, that's not in the news on a daily basis. That's like an obscure corner of the world, but it is an important geopolitical corner of the world. And the fact that the U.S. administration has taken a constructive role there has to be an important indicator.
Why do you guys think that Trump canceled his there was supposed to be a meeting in Budapest between Trump and Putin, and there's a lot of hope. There was a lot of hope, obviously, coming out of Alaska, that something good can be cut as a deal that could feasibly put an end, or at least a more hopeful end, to this never-ending war on Russia's front in Ukraine. It was canceled. There was a call, I think a 2-hour call or something instead. But what do you think resulted, or why was that decision made, Drago?
Well, officially, the Washington, D.C. said because Russia released this memo about the causes of the war that, of course, places the blame on the United States, which, of course, we know is the case, but specifically on the Biden administration. So, of course, that's just the official version. What I think is really happening is Trump is just trying to play his cards the best way he can to get a better deal. Because, Trump is very much used to this, in the cutthroat real estate market of the United States. And he's just pretty much applying that on a geopolitical level. For Russia, of course, Russia is more like playing with actual cards, while the U.S. is trying to use these cards of like a potential escalation if they want to do it. Especially when it comes to these Tomahawk cruise missiles that the U.S. officially is now sending. But what most people don't realize is that the Russians have been shooting down the Storm Shadow, British-made or Anglo-French actually cruise missiles, which are more advanced because they're stealth. They have a stealthy design, while the Tomahawk doesn't really have a stealthy design. It has been used, since the 1980s. Like even the Yugoslav army during the NATO bombing in 1999 was able to shoot down a lot of these missiles because they're essentially like almost like aircraft that are flying very low. And if you have adequate air defenses, you can shoot them down. And the Russians have one of the best air defense systems in the world. So it's not really a problem for them. And now we see that Putin is not budging, and of course Trump doesn't want to do it as well because he doesn't want to look weak. And also we don't even know if the summit has been canceled because the Russians keep saying it has only been postponed. So it's a bit of like on a clutch. We still don't know what's going to happen. We'll see whether this has really been canceled. I hope not, because again, as I said, when leaders of countries like China, Russia, and the United States talk, we have a hope that this night is not going to dawn at 3 a.m. So, which is always good.
Yeah. That's a very, very strong point. All right, we're going to shift gears for a few questions before we round out our show today. Do you guys have a little bit of time still left on your hands?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, cool. So here we got Adjunct Merita writes, I'll just put it up on the screen here. Should we be concerned about civil war in the U.S. or Canada? Lots of talk here in the U.S. and seems that paramilitary types are trying to recruit kids. I'll just add something to that. It's a concern I've had for a while. I've read Colonel Fletcher Prouty's works exposing the Green Berets CIA operations through a secret team back in 1973, where Prouty described already, this is the guy who was in charge of the liaison between the State Department and the CIA, who was already back then. His book is so important, right? He's the advisor to Oliver Stone in the JFK film. Already then describing in detail the village pacification operations and psychological warfare operations that had been honed in Vietnam that were then applied to the United States in preparation for an oncoming conflict. He goes through it in great detail of the various training facilities set up by the Green Berets and broader special forces all across the United States, and I would say Canada. So it's definitely something I'm concerned about, is the ongoing operation that Prouty had already exposed 40 plus years ago, that I see certain influencers definitely appearing on the scene in especially alternative media, certainly recruiting people, I think, to that idea of becoming killers to kill and be killed in the oncoming inevitable thing. So that's a concern I definitely have to the person asking the question. What do you guys think of this matter?
Go, Drago.
Well, I mean, coming from former Yugoslavia, we had this here, although like on a historical level, we had conflicts from before that could have been exploited. And of course, they were exploited to a maximum, and creating hatred where maybe there was none or it has been dormant for decades. The U.S. doesn't really have those issues. However, these people are experts at, pushing brother against brother. So I don't think, it's impossible. However, it's very important for the Americans and Canadians and whoever is going to be or would be involved in this to be aware of what's going on. And of course, these, supercharging these divisions, of course, is one of the best ways to create conflict and, of course, push it towards war. In the United States, of course, that would be catastrophic considering the amount of firearms that Americans hold. So I really hope it's not going to go towards that, but we can't just, sit on our asses, pardon my French, and expect it's not going to happen. Like, I think it's very important for the people themselves to be engaged in preventing this or trying to ameliorate the situation, trying to prevent the rising tensions. And that can be done. But again, as I said, we have to be aware that very, very powerful people who have tested this on smaller countries are certainly going to be ready to use them on a larger scale.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. I got a question for Alex. Do you think that Trump is intentionally taking steps to weaken or dismantle central bank control? What strategies do you see behind this approach? Asks Grace.
Thank you, Grace, for the excellent question and very relevant question. Yes, I think he's absolutely taking deliberate steps to weaken central bank's independence, because that is a very necessary prerequisite for any kind of reform of the society, of the financial system, and of the economy that I think that Trump is taking, or at least, he has been talking about doing things in this direction. I see that the U.S. government has also been taking, steps to take control, shareholding in strategic companies like Intel and certain others as well, because I think that they have understood that state definitely has a legitimate role in the economy, and that all this, we've been brainwashed, and I was part of this also because I went to the university and studied economics, and I took the whole everything very, very seriously. But basically, there's this idea that the state has no legitimate role to play in the economy, that it should all be private enterprise, private undertaking, and so forth. You can't build tens of thousands of miles of high-speed railroads through private initiative, because these are investments that aren't the payoff isn't quarterly. The payoff isn't even in 10 years' time. The payoff is maybe on a multi-decade scale. And you have to build something that's not going to be profitable for a very long time, or maybe never at all, but that lifts the whole economy to a higher level because it reduces the cost of transactions. Example, the Erie Canal was built between the east coast of the United States and the Great Lakes. It reduced the cost of trading between the two regions by 90%. And that lifted the economies on both sides. You can't do that by, American politicians have been talking about high-speed railways for decades, maybe for as long as I've been paying attention. So, it must be more than 30 years. And very often you heard them, State of the Union address, clean diesel technologies and high-speed railroad. And by today, I think that in all of the United States, maybe less than 100 miles of high-speed railroads have been built, meaning pretty much nothing. And none of them are operational in the sense of really actually transporting cargo and people. Whereas China, in the last 22, 23 years, they built something like 50,000 kilometers, 30,000 miles. And this was all state initiative. And so looking at the success of Chinese, behind Chinese achievements in developing the economy and the world's most advanced, most competitive technologies, a lot of it has been directed by the state. And then, farther down in the hierarchy, it gets farmed out to individual private entrepreneurs. But the direction and the support, creating, let's say, a favorable environment for the growth of these companies and businesses and technologies, that initiative comes from the state. Same thing in Russia. Same thing in Germany in the second half of the 19th century. Same thing in Japan in after World War II. Same thing in Germany after World War II. The same thing, the United States from the great, was it the Great Deal, Matt, FDR?
New Deal.
Yeah, the New Deal. That's the same thing. So I think that there's a recognition of this principle in the Trump administration. And so I think that they're moving in that direction. But I think that there's a lot of ideological pushback. So they kind of have to maneuver very carefully around this. As they say, if you live in the house of blind, don't rearrange the furniture. So I think that Trump is trying to do as much as he can without rearranging the furniture.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, Drago, I got another question. This one direct to you, Drago. Why do you think the Kiev regime decided to loosen restrictions for young men aged 18 to 22 at a time when they're desperately short of manpower? What is the strategic or political reasoning behind this?
Yeah,
this is actually also from Grace. Okay, I just noticed that. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I've written about it. recently. So I mean, we have to understand that the Kiev regime doesn't make decisions for itself. Otherwise, it wouldn't be doing that. I mean, otherwise it wouldn't be doing like 90% of what it's doing, or even 99% of what it's doing. So in essence, if they're doing that, they've been told by someone in the West, oh, we need these kids, you know, we need them for whatever, for economic or any other reasons. We need cheap labor and so on. And, you know, this is a very good alternative for those kids, you know, to actually being sent to the trench and dying to Russian drones and artillery. So they're going to take that chance at any time because, who wouldn't? If you put yourself in their position, you would do the same. So this is the reason. I mean, it's better than dying, obviously. So I just lament for all those other people who are between 25 and 60 who don't have that luxury of just leaving the country at a time when millions of people are being sent to the meat grinder. I mean, the military tactics of the Kiev regime have been absolutely suicidal. And the reason why that is because they're not really the Ukrainian government. I keep saying, like, Ukraine has not existed as a country for years because it's not being run by Ukrainians. It's being run by someone else who is using Ukraine as a tool of warfare against Russia. And for them, they don't give a flying damn, let's say, how many Ukrainians are going to die, because they're not planning for the Ukrainian state. You know, on the long term, they're planning to use Ukraine as a tool of warfare against Russia, pretty much.
Yep. All right. Warren asks, is there not potential to retool and reorient the military-industrial complex to massive intercontinental cooperative development projects like the World Land Bridge, mini nuclear power for the Arctic, and space travel? Then he throws in the name Burevestnik, which I don't actually know what that is a reference to.
Burevestnik, it's a nuclear-powered cruise missile.
Bon, okay, good, thank you. I mean, that's a question. It's a concern I have. Like, are we too far gone? Is there too much blood on the hands of the military-industrial complex, such that something moral and good could be alchemically transformed out of this monstrosity after so many decades of decay, such that it could serve a positive role for humanity to build these big things? Or what? I guess that's a question for both you guys. Alex, you want to take it first?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think so, because I think that the model where, such a huge chunk of your economy is based on the military-industrial complex, I think that model is unsustainable, even from the standpoint that it's churning out obsolete weapon systems, and it's unable to reform itself even to the requirements of modern warfare. So that has got to implode, and its products are extraordinarily expensive. You can't compete with multi-million-dollar missiles and helicopters and aircraft against $5,000 drones that can be produced in absolutely massive numbers. But I think that dismantling the military-industrial complex is going to have to be a long-term process, that you're going to have to create incentives for people to start small and medium-sized enterprise to produce, civilian products and services, and that such businesses will create enough jobs that pay good salaries that they're going to be able to poach the employees from the military-industrial companies to the other civilian sectors of the economy. And then the government can also help by recruiting these companies to produce other things, because other things are going to be needed, not just weapons, but all kinds of other stuff can be built in an economy that is required. And one of the things that the United States needs now is an overhaul of its infrastructure. And I wanted to say something on the account of the Burevestnik, because something I didn't think of, but I heard Larry Johnson talk about it. You see, the reason why Burevestnik is very important is because it doesn't have a limited range, right? It can travel far, and it can hit any target anywhere in the world from any direction. And the whole defense concept of the Western powers has been based on these missile defense systems, the ones like that were built in Romania and in Poland. And the idea behind that was that, okay, we're going to launch a first strike nuclear attack on Russia. We're going to hopefully destroy 60% of their nuclear retaliation capacity. And then with these defense with these missile defense installations, we're going to be able to largely neutralize their retaliatory strike. And the way these things works is they're called anti-ballistic missile sites. The anti-ballistic missile tells you the whole thing. It's the whole thing is built and designed around shooting down ballistic missiles, which means missiles that have a predictable trajectory. So you can kind of calculate how to shoot them down. Once you have, and then, we do have cruise missiles, but they top up in terms of range. I think the maximum range is about 4,000 kilometers. The Russians now tested a vehicle, not the missile itself, but the vehicle. I mean, not the warhead, but the vehicle, and they flew it successfully for 14,000 kilometers. So that means that these anti-ballistic missiles, the whole concept now makes any idea of winning the nuclear war completely. It doesn't compute. It's obsolete. It doesn't work anymore. So I think everybody in the West should actually celebrate this innovation, because it has taken us another step away from nuclear annihilation. That is, those people who were lusting for a nuclear confrontation because they imagined that we could win the nuclear war against Russia, they now completely lost the argument. There's no coming back from this. But the even more important aspect of this, potentially, is the fact that this technology could maybe be converted to civilian uses. I mean, imagine flying vehicles with unlimited range, aircraft, flying cars. If the Russians created this nuclear-powered jet engine, what else could you build it into? Maybe this is the Jetsons stuff.
Well, they had. I've got a 1950s science magazine that I got at an antique store for like $10, and it was fascinating because they're going through inside this thing. That was actually on the cover was a supersonic jet that was being heralded as within a decade, nuclear-powered civilian jets that would be hypersonic in nature. That was just around the corner, apparently. And when you actually read the article, it wasn't just Jetson fantasizing. They were going through concrete measures that federal governments of Canada, the USA, of Europe had actually practically invested in cutting-edge R&D, like real big investments that was making the idea of small. I mean, they did it for nuclear subs, but to have even smaller, more compact nuclear-powered batteries for cars, even for houses, for jets, such that a little, grain of uranium or thorium was going to be able to power, like you wouldn't have to replace this battery for like 80 years, like it's ridiculous, the quality of thinking and how all of that was just sabotaged. It was lost with the murder of JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy. I mean, the entire transformation of the paradigm of the 60s that completely changed our priorities and our values towards things like the wasting Vietnam War, this idea of getting into a post-industrial society that would be somehow cleaner and less dirty than an industrial society. But we were close to it. So the idea you're saying is that we might be seeing a reemergence of this lost tradition of thinking about cutting edge.
I was just about to jump in and say the Rosatom actually declared a patent like several months ago about these many reactors. And Putin said himself that in the Burevestnik, the reactor can fire up in a matter of seconds. And sometimes, of course, you need years to actually fire up a real nuclear reactor in a nuclear power plant. But this actually fires up in seconds, which, of course, is going to revolutionize the economy pretty much if we apply it to actual things that work and not, murder millions of people in a matter of seconds. Regarding what Alex said about the missile defenses, like even the so-called missile defenses are not actually missile defenses; they're offensive weapons, because these containers for missiles, they're called MK41. You have no idea what they are, what they contain, unless you open them. Of course, nobody's going to allow you to open up those things. So they can house Tomahawk cruise missiles, they can house ballistic missiles, they can house whatever you want, because they also exist on ships. So in essence, it's not just about that they want to shoot down the rest of the Russian missiles, but they also want to fire more of these medium-range missiles at Russia before Russia gets the chance to respond. And also, I just want to say the Khabarovsk submarines, nuclear submarine, was just launched. And those things are even more dangerous because they carry the Poseidon nuclear torpedo or drone torpedo, whatever you want to call it, depends who you ask what it is. But I just want to say this thing, is far more dangerous because it has, some people say, between 2 and 100 megatons of the destructive power. So 100 megatons is equivalent to 100 million tons of TNT exploding at once. So it's an unimaginable amount of destructive power. And it's not even designed to hit cities directly, but it's designed to create so-called nuclear tsunamis. And the worst part is the warhead is using the cobalt-60, which is highly radioactive. So you're not just creating nuclear tsunamis, you're creating nuclear tsunamis where the water would forever, contaminate.
Burn for yeah.
Yeah. So it's a doomsday device. It's the end of the world device. And this is just one fraction of it. The Russians also have the RS-28 Sarmat, which has the destructive power of 750 Hiroshima bombs, and that's just one missile. And they have they're building 50 of those. So people who want to wage war against a country like Russia or China or the United States, because the United States has 400 ICBMs. They're very old, but they're still ICBMs. I mean, those people who are pushing for that, they cannot be normal. They cannot be normal by any stretch of imagination or by any definition. And, I read these, studies by the RAND Corporation and those other think tanks connected to the Pentagon, where they talk about stuff like winning a nuclear war or acceptable collateral damage in a nuclear exchange. I mean, what is acceptable? Is it 50 million people, 100 million people, 2 million people? And how do you control the level of escalation? Because let's say you take out a city of 2 million people and then hope for the best, because hoping for the best is maybe they're not going to respond because we're going to fire the rest of our arsenal and so on. Are you willing to play the nuclear roulette with the Russians? I mean, it really is, or anyone, the Chinese, the North Koreans, and so on. Whoever thinks this is acceptable, they should be in jail or in a nut house or something, not making decisions for any government.
Well, that's exactly it, Drago. That's exactly it, because the whole risk to all of us was that people like this win an argument, because it's not like these things are going to be launched by one person. There's a hierarchy of people, and you have to persuade them. We're going to launch this because we're going to win it, and based on everything you just explained, their argument is lost. And so when they say let's go ahead with this, people in the hierarchy are going to say, you belong in a nut house, just as you said. And so that's the fact that this Poseidon and the Burevestnik exist for that reason takes us from the precipice of a nuclear confrontation, because people on the other side are going to say we can't risk this because there's just no way we avoid our own annihilation.
Yeah.
Well, this is probably the most counterintuitive thing. If we remove these nuclear weapons, which of course any sane person would say, well, that's great. We're not going to destroy ourselves. We should remove this gasoline that we've poured on ourselves. Yeah. Like philosophically speaking, it's perfect. However, like strategically speaking, and just like when it comes to the human nature, if you remove it, then what's to prevent us from killing each other in a big conventional war? So like in a way, in a very crazy, weird way, these nuclear weapons are keeping us safe until someone presses the button, of course. So it's not the ideal solution for, maintaining global peace to a certain degree, but we haven't found a better solution, because before we had nukes, we had world wars. Now we have like a bunch of proxy conflicts, but we still haven't had a nuclear war. So it's a very difficult question. On a personal level, I would say just remove all nukes. We don't need them. But like if somebody really gave me the choice to do it, I'm not sure what I would do, because if you remove them, you remove the only thing that prevents people from killing each other, pretty much.
Yeah, there was a movie. I don't know if you guys watched it. In 1964, it was released. It began filming in 1962. Called 7 Days in May. Have you guys seen that one? It's good. It's good to watch it maybe on a night where people are going to watch Dr. Strangelove, which was filmed 2 years earlier, or no, around the same year. No, yeah. 1964, I think, was the release date for both of those films. This one is John Frankenheimer, a friend of John and Bobby Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy gave Frankenheimer authorization to even film in the White House grounds, and it features Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster, and it's basically the story of a U.S. military coup featured in a book published in 1961. Burt Lancaster plays this sort of Lyman Lemnitzer, sort of head of the Joint Chiefs, who believes the president currently in there is a weak man who, is trying to create a nuclear deal with the Soviets to denuclearize and to create a new post mutual assured destruction paradigm. And they organize a false flag to overthrow the president and install this military figure as a fascist dictator in America. And it's the story of how Kirk Douglas blows the whistle, kind of plays the role of a Smedley Butler type to expose this thing, and it's really well done. And I think it was quite the intervention before the days when before Hollywood had completely lost its soul. There was still some patriotic artistry that was really potent, really potent. So there's that story. Just wanted
Sorry, Matt, how many days in May?
7 days.
7 days in May.
Yeah, $5. You can buy it on YouTube or rent it on YouTube. Easy, one click. I wouldn't normally encourage YouTube, but it's a thing. But I agree with you, Drago. Like it's a bittersweet thing, eh? Like most of human history, if you look at it, has been mostly war much of the time. There's been these periods of like respite now and again, but ongoing conflict orchestrated by an oligarchical caste above the show has been the norm from most of the time. And big wars, big wars. Now we've had, since the nuclear weapons were sort of brought online, a lot of asymmetric wars that have done a lot of damage. I mean, it's terrible how much, but the big World War type scale maneuvers have not really happened since World War II. And I think that the nuclear weapons have, in a certain way, bought us that time. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't be used on the one hand. But the question is, if we don't have nuclear weapons, will that mean guaranteed guaranteed wars again, big wars again? As the new normal? It makes me think a little bit about the importance of the culture, right? Because if you look at what FDR was organizing with his allies internationally in China and Russia back in those days in South America, despite the fact that you had this Rockefeller oligarchical fifth column deep state operation being built up, and that has been built up since 1776. It's always been there. It didn't go away. But despite that thing, you had also a healthier tradition of what the U.S. aspired to be as far as abiding by its own principles in its founding documents, which I believe FDR was doing his best to try to bring into reality. There was this idea that, okay, if we can internationalize the New Deal by taking the success of what resulted in these mega projects that uplifted people from poverty and increased the productive powers of labor by taming the business, the behavior of business and economics towards something which is also in the greater good, as well as providing monetary incentives for investors, so that there was no like dichotomy of personal profit and the greater good. If we could do that as the basis of foreign policy for India, for China, for Africa, for South America, for Russia, to provide for international New Deals, as was the basis of the fight of Harry Dexter White and many of the New Deal allies of FDR, then I think you could have had a world which saw the atom used purely for peaceful purposes, because our culture would realize that we're made for something better than living as cannon fodder forever for an elite. But we have something more dignified as our destiny. But that didn't happen. So we've never had that actualize. We came close, but it never manifested. So I think the question is really one of culture, and that brings up the question I want to end with, or maybe start moving towards the finale of today's show, because we're approaching the 2-hour mark. Is Alex, you recently attended the Pluralia Verona summit on multipolarity from October 20, I think it was 29th and 30th in Istanbul. And this is something which you've made a point has given you a lot of hope, a lot of optimism about the type of thinking that is currently being demonstrated amongst business and political class of those who are resonating with our ideas like our own. Can you say a little bit about what you experienced in the Pluralia Verona summit more broadly, and like what's your take on that going forward?
Thank you for the question, Matt. It's something that I could go on about for probably 2 hours, because I find it extraordinarily important, and I have to be sincere that. So first time I was invited was in Baku in 2022, I believe. That was because these events were being held in Verona for the first 14 or 15 times, once a year, and then because of the sanctions that were imposed on Russia after the special military operation in Ukraine, Russian attendees could no longer participate. So now the event is moving. So it was in Baku, it was in Samarkand, it was in UAE. Now it was in Istanbul. This is a gathering of industrialists, of bankers, very high level CEOs, CFOs, directors of large banks like Gazprom Bank, like Rosatom, like these types of companies. And I have to say that the first time I was there and I participated, I had a bit of a doubt in my mind. Am I, did I find myself on a gathering of the baddies, And I paid very close attention to the message, and I have to say that my very strong impression is that the message is very positive, in the sense that it embraces a different worldview. It's not a predatory worldview. It's a worldview that comes from the place of love for humanity, and a genuine desire to uplift the conditions of humanity. But this is something that the organizers themselves say that this is coming from a place of personal responsibility. And so I don't know if I should mention names just in case I will not, but one of the main organizers was saying that we have an absolute personal responsibility to see this through, to act in a way, to try to do things in the way that uplift the humanity. And it's a lot of it is even talks about music and art and tourism, not tourism as in going to Airbnb and chilling for 2 weeks, but tourism as in visiting other cultures, learning about them, learning the respect of the other, rather than going there to colonize and destroy them and enslave them. And so this message keeps on resonating, keeps on being it's in almost every panel. But why am I saying but? Because These are, again, this is an outgrowth of personal responsibility. It's extremely important that this is expressed, because a lot of people feel that way. But if you're in a world where, words like love and peace and happiness and freedom make you feel like you're the weakling, because you should be just harsh, you should just like drive after profits, maximize the profits, just like squeeze everybody to the bone, then if everybody's acting this way, then you're just shooting yourself in the foot, and you're being you're not performing, right? So if this is something that's being a message that's being broadcast, then it gains legitimacy. But beyond that, I think we have to go to regulation, because it can't just be up to the individual people. It's an important event, and I think it's important in the sense that we can, this is something that I've been having an internal debate for a long time. Is banking inevitably evil? Because, we just talked in the beginning about Venezuela and about the incentive, the absolutely enormous incentive that the banking cartel has to take political control and to colonize and to build an empire. Is this inevitable? And you would almost say, well, yes, it's inevitable, because the incentive is so enormous. It's just a question of ruthless and unscrupulous enough people coming to the decisions, to the place of decision making. But then you also have the German banking model, which has existed since the late 1800s, right? And that banking model is also banking, but it's actually uplifting regions and communities and cultures. So I'm sorry to give a rambling review, but this is something that could literally be talked about for hours upon hours, and we just spent 3 days talking about it. It's a very important subject, and I think it's an important consideration in deciding the new direction for the development of humanity, and it's a complete break with what we've known for 500 years. And I think that if we can reform banking, then that whole idea that we're always going to fall upon each other and kill each other unless we have nuclear weapons, that all falls away. We don't. I think that warfare is not inevitable.
Yeah, I realize I threw a lot at you there as a request there to compress a 3-day experience into just like 5 minutes. But yeah, I think you did a good job to get the essence across. And certainly, if you'd be down, I'd like to talk to you just about this maybe later this week on Beyond Geopolitics.
Sure. Yes, yeah? With pleasure.
Okay, great, awesome. Drago and Alex. Drago, actually, I let me give it to you. Do you have any final words, parting thoughts for people listening right now before we close it out? We got
just like minutes. A quick. This would be a shameless promotion of a movie that I just watched. The new one. It's called The House of Dynamite, or The House of the Dynamite, and it just like came out. I watched it a few days ago at the movie theater, and it's about nuclear war, and it's essentially like somebody launches an attack on the United States, and they have to make the decision who to retaliate against, because their early warning systems were blinded, or there was some cyber attack and they don't know who to retaliate against. There's a lot of Pentagon propaganda in it, but like the messaging is very important, because it shows just how pointless nuclear war is. And I would advise people to watch it. Like if they don't want to watch something from the 60s, which of course, as you said, they should. But if they want to watch something more modern, but it's still like with a similar message, they should watch this movie, because it really sends a good message that it's all pointless, and that we can all, as Alex said, we can all just live together and cooperate, or not cooperate, but still like not fight each other.
Right. Cool. All right. So people have some fun homework to do. Yep. Guys, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me this week, despite all of the technical issues caused by the stupid daylight saving stuff, which we will again commit to resolve when we take over. thank you guys, and I look forward to more fruitful conversations going forward. And all of the links to both of your work is going to be available in the description box, including a list of fun videos and movies that people should watch if they don't want to waste time watching disappointing predictive programming on Netflix. There's better things to watch, and I'll put a link of some of those items in the description box under this video as well. So till 2 weeks from now, this is Pluralia Dialogos. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.